Hello, welcome. SLP242 Module 6. Okay. Oh, yay. My closed captioning is working. Yay. Okay. Couple different things. This week we have a quiz, which is multiple choice, true, false. So be sure you read the questions clearly or carefully. And if you're not sure, reread it. Sometimes, um, somebody asked if you read the questions out loud. Um, I get it. Be careful. They don't really want you talking out loud, but just reread them. Make sure you're understanding what they're asking. That's hard for me because I do talk to myself sometimes when I'm reading something, make sure I understand it. Okay. Critical thinking questions. So the critical thinking question, and I'm going to just reference, our ASHA article. So I'll show you which one, because somebody asked which article are they referring to. And then we have, just a module summary. So let's go to the read and review. So it's this one. This is the main thing for to help you answer the questions and do the assignment. Okay. And there's a lot of different components with intellectual disabilities. And oftentimes, too, what I don't want you guys to think about, because I think sometimes this does get interchanged, is if we say somebody is, has a developmental disability or they have a developmental delay, that does not mean they have an intellectual disability. Ultimately, they could, but those intellectual disabilities should not be changed with developmental disability. Okay, so just remember those are two different things. Somebody who is developmentally delayed could have an intellectual disability, but they're not one and the same. So I just want to clear that up. I don't think that's clear. And oftentimes, when we're talking about individuals with various disabilities, a lot of times I don't know why, instead of saying intellectual disability, they might say developmental disability. So those are not one and the same. You could have an intellectual disability and be developmentally delayed, but just remember. And the other thing we want to say, so right off the bat, so used to be, and quite honestly, Arizona was kind of one of the last states to get with the program on this. That, well, when we're talking about an intellectual disability, it used to be called mentally retarded. So we know retarded is not a word we like, it's not acceptable anymore. You might read something that says that. Um, so instead of saying MR, we say ID, intellectual disability. So we might use MR as the acronym, but it should be ID. But you might, for those of us who've been in special ed for a long, long time, and it was referred to as MR until I think in the last 10 years we finally changed it. I'm not sure exactly what year we changed that, but yes, it's intellectual disability. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about those components. So let me go to the presentation. But I feel like developmental delay kind of gets lumped with the um, intellectual disability, and those are not, they shouldn't be interchanged. Okay, intellectual disability. And we'll come back to why it's important you guys understand this, even though, quote unquote, we're not treating. Oh, I don't like it when it moves on its own. Hold on. Okay, so intellectual disability is characterized by below average intelligence, mental ability, or difficulty adapting to the demands of independent living. So there is a range of degrees of intellectual disabilities from mild to profound. Okay, so someone with an intellectual disability is described as having limitations in the following areas. Cognitive functioning, this is commonly known as IQ. So your IQ refers to a person's ability to learn, reason, make decisions, solve problems. Adaptive behaviors, another component. Skills necessary for day-to-day life. such as being able to communicate effectively, interact with others, and take care of oneself and their daily living needs, basically independently. So the age of onset of the developmental period. So while intellectual disability does not have a specific age requirement, an individual's symptoms must begin during the developmental period and are diagnosed based on the severity of deficits in adaptive functioning. Okay, so this disorder is considered chronic and often co-occurs with other mental conditions like depression, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorder. Okay, so IQ. So IQ is kind of the oldest form. It's kind of that cognitive score. So a psychologist administers an IQ test. Typically, a person is considered intellectually disabled if he or she has an IQ of 70 to 75. Now, school-based, and I do want to just say this in various avenues in various states. Typically, we are considering somebody who is intellectually impaired if they have an IQ below 70 or below, as also have other impairments as far as in adaptive skills. So an IQ is one measurement of somebody's intellectual capabilities. There's fun IQ tests. Be familiar. You will read these. So when you're reading reports, you will oftentimes see the full scale IQ. You will see what IQ test they did. And these are English speaking. There are different tests in other languages, but the WISC, Stanford Binet, and the Kaufman are ones you'll see pretty often. So an adaptive behavior. So this is really important. So to measure a child's adaptive behaviors, a specialist will observe the child's skills and compare them to other children of the same age. Things that may be observed include how well the child can feed or dress himself or herself, how well the child is able to communicate with and understand others, and how the child interacts with family, friends, and other children of the same age. Okay, just my little caveat on adaptive behavior skills. I will tell you that somebody can have a normal average IQ, but have really poor adaptive skills, and that impairs them. That can make you, quote unquote, function like somebody with an intellectual disability. Poor adaptive is really the basis of whether or not you are going to have issues taking care of yourself. So what's interesting I'm finding, and sorry, I won't get too off, but we're seeing a lot of children who actually have normal IQs, etc., but have really poor adaptive skills that really don't know how to take care of themselves or haven't been taught. They don't, and that can impair them, especially if you have a quote unquote average kid. They go off to college. Are they going to be able to do this? Are they going to be able to, communicate with people they've never had to communicate with? Can they adapt with their basic daily living skills? Can they do daily living skills? And there's kids who can but don't. So that's a problem. And that's really when we're talking some of that mental health area too. The adaptive skills are dramatically impacted. And that's a huge issue for a person, because then that means they're going to have challenges being independent, being an independent, learner and earner, as we say at school. Learner and earner, independent learner and an independent earner. Okay, so adaptive functioning is affected by these three basic skill sets. So I want you to get real comfortable. We use adaptive all the time. Myself, my SLPA, we have conversations all the time about the kids that we work with adaptive skills. And when I did home health, when I would have conversations with my SLPA, especially if we're doing home health, we really focus on some of these adaptive skills to help them improve and be more independent in clinic-based also. So definitely, and in school, the independent skills look a little different than they do at home, but we work on them for sure. So the first skill set is conceptual skills. So this is reading, numbers, money, time, communication. Then we got social skills. Can we get along well with others? Can we understand social rules and customs, obeying laws? You know, definitely having that ability to avoid victimization and deception. So we don't want, and in this sense, it's we don't want people being taken advantage of. Do they have awareness so somebody won't take advantage of them? And then practical life skills. Can they do daily living activities without help from mom and dad? And this includes feeding, not just feeding yourself, but also when we're looking at our adult adolescent population, can they make their own food? Can they get their own snack? Can they do those things? Bathing, um, dressing, occupational skills, navigational skills. Can they find something if they don't know where it is? Can they find it? So, does deficits in adaptive functioning result in failure to meet developmental and socio-cultural standards for personal independence and social responsibility? So, there's lots of components to the adaptive part. And I think sometimes when we're looking at functioning, this is where we see the difference. Even if somebody, quote unquote, has a lower IQ, but they've got good adaptive skills, we won't necessarily label them intellectually disabled, because you really got to meet both parts. You got to meet the intellectual, that number part, sorry, full scale IQ part, as well as the adaptive piece, kind of those two components. And if they're both impaired, that's how you kind of meet that criteria of intellectually impaired. So prevalence of intellectual disability. Intellectual disability is thought to affect about 1% of the population. Of those affected, 85% have mild intellectual disability. So, and here are 4 levels of intellectual disability. So oftentimes when we're talking about intellectual disability, we're talking about the mild intellectual group. That's the bulk. Um, you know, maybe they could be independent living. I have a kid right now. Actually, he's the psych and I just had a conversation because he really, now where he's at as a high schooler, has really come up as far as his adaptive skills. You know, he has a job, he's learning how to drive. Like, he doesn't really meet that kind of adaptive component, even though his IQ is lower. And his history is a little complicated. Um, and we were talking about how much his speech and language has improved. So I don't feel like he doesn't come across as intellectually disabled anymore. And we were having that discussion because we have to kind of maybe change his category of eligibility. So we were having a good discussion about it, as long as with his parents also, just how much he's improved. So mild is the bulk, and I want to say there are good outcomes for a lot of our kids with a mild intellectual disability. Moderate is, we still see some major issues in communication. They might have some basic reading, writing, and counting skills, and I'm talking very rudimentary, and maybe independent living possible with some support. Can get around to their own on their own familiar places, and then take part in various types of social activities. So you look at the IQ range. Severe. So severe ID is really huge components of impairment in language comprehension, noticeable motor impairment, severe damage to or abnormal development of their central nervous system. So there's, we're talking very, very limited skills. So IQ range 20 to 34. So we definitely work with clients who have a severe intellectual disability. And then profound. So this is someone who really cannot follow a simple request instruction, maybe are immobile, maybe are incontinent, maybe have some very basic nonverbal communication skills, and just really have no inability to care for their own needs independently. So, for instance, someone asked the difference between severe and profound. So, a profound intellectual disability is someone who needs basically 24 around the clock care versus somebody maybe with severe will probably need quite a bit of care, but it wouldn't be what we call around the clock, so to speak. You know, they might have a motor impairment, but they might be able to get up and go get their own snack. They might be able to do some basic things for themselves versus someone who's profound really can't. So um, that's kind of, and here's what I want to say. If you have a client with a profound or severe intellectual disability, or even somebody with a moderate, what you will find with their plan that there's something very specific you're working on with that client. We are trying to achieve some type of adaptive goal to help with their basic daily living skills, basic maybe leisure skill, something to work on independence usually, or some basic consistent communication. But there's usually a purpose, and somebody who maybe has a profound or severe, you will be able to, get some help and support from your supervisor. Because usually, if we're recommending therapy, there's something very specific we are trying to accomplish. So causes of intellectual disability. Okay, so there's a gamut, and I'm not sure if we know them all. So, and here's what I wish, again, if we would just start doing some genetic testing with some of our kids instead of just giving them an autism label. We can maybe tease a little bit more of this out, although Europe is doing better than the US on genetic testing. But oftentimes we cannot identify cause. There is no known causes, but there might be. So we know certain exposure to drugs, alcohol, or other toxins during birth, before birth, or right after birth. You're exposed to something. You had oxygen deprivation, which is usually premature delivery. So those kids that are born early, low birth weight, traumatic birth of some type, maybe we're doing okay, but then some kind of trauma at birth, we know can definitely impact their long-term intellectual capabilities, inherited disorders, and there's a ton. These are kind of the common ones. But, or, something chromosomal anomaly, like Down syndrome is one. Lead or mercury poisoning, anything like that, severe malnutrition or other dietary issues. So some of these kids who do have severe malnutrition, severe allergies, things like that, we do think that there could be, not always, not a one-to-one correspondence, can be some negative challenges with their cognition. And just even a severe case of childhood illness. So even something like meningitis. I've had a couple kids who've had meningitis real young, really changed some things for them. Whooping cough, measles, any kind of strange illness that are not strange illness, but an illness that really impacted their system. A brain injury for sure. Like I said, 2/3 of all the children who have an intellectual disability, the cause is unknown. We don't know what caused it. So can it be prevented? Okay, well, we know some common ones like don't drink alcohol when you're pregnant. Don't take drugs while you're pregnant. That might be a good start. Proper prenatal care, taking a prenatal vitamin, making sure your body, because it depletes your body of a lot of essential nutrients. Pregnancy does for sure. Getting vaccinated against certain infectious diseases can definitely lower your risk of challenges with your baby. Genetic testing oftentimes is recommended. I really wish people did more genetic testing, not necessarily when you're trying to have a baby, but for a child who's having challenges, just looking at that genetic test, I think we might be able to make some advances in some of these areas. And some of these early tests they take, just because something comes up, you have to take everything with a grain of salt for sure. So individuals with intellectual disability and associated language and communication disorders may demonstrate signs and symptoms of spoken or written language issues. And it might be across the various levels. It could be with phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics. So treatment targets and context. So if you look at this, please just be familiar. So a lot of this stuff, someone's like, this isn't a whole lot different than basic language. Well, what we do know, just give you a little caveat, that low cognition skills also indicate poor language skills. So there is a verbal communication or verbal IQ score. So there's the verbal IQ. And we look at that in comparison to full scale IQ or nonverbal IQ. So a lot of the basic things we do for somebody with an intellectual disability is just basic language. Pragmatic stuff for sure. We work on that social communication piece. So again, what might you be doing? So really a lot of times too, we're partnering with the families, helping support the families. And how can we set our client up for success at home? How can we improve their adaptive skills to make them more independent? And really usually you're one piece of the puzzle. You're not the only person providing support. They're usually getting support by other providers. And like right now with the adolescent group, we're really looking at what are some jobs that they can do? What's something that they can do and be successful at? Because just because you have an intellectual disability doesn't mean that you can't work or have a career or accomplish a lot. There's plenty that people can do. So you can make progress. What we also know, though, is that the challenge could be is that sometimes progress is slower with our clients with intellectual disabilities. So you have to have a good, reasonable, expectation. But what we really want to do is help improve just their daily lives. Whatever can we do that's functional, that's supportive, and helps our client, like I said, be more independent in whatever way possible is really what we're trying to do. That's really an ultimate goal. Um, yeah, and it's just a reference. So IQ is just one thing we consider. It's not the end all be all. So that's the other thing. And just because someone is low, have a lower intellectual, doesn't mean that we don't think we can support them or make progress. So we just have to know the expectation might be it's slower, it might take longer, we might need more repetition, but that's okay. So look through the presentation, read that article from ASHA, and then you should be ready for the quiz. I really like this too. So this is a nice little summary. There's some good information on this. But like I said, a lot of this is review. And really, we just want you to have a good idea of when you'll hear comments like their mild ID, the moderate ID. What does that look? What might that look like? Have an idea. Because what I think I can tell you guys is as an SLPA starting out, and I have a brother who has probably what could be characterized as severe or moderate intellectual disability. I guess sometimes my expectation for progress, I really wasn't always realistic as to what my expectation was when I started working with some of my clients right away. Because you do have to consider their cognitive. And it took, a supervisor really explaining to me some of the different levels and what can be my expectation, what is realistic, and how do we help support them. So a lot of times too, our clients with an intellectual disability they need a lot of repetition, same thing over and over and over again. So yeah, and someone's like, can I watch the lecture? Yes, you can. It's one from last semester, pretty much the same. So thank you guys for joining me and have a good night.